Right. So yesterday I have discussed about the release part. I think as a part of introduction in reference to the agile, even I have discussed about the release planning part, right? So because especially in we see the difference between the traditional to agile environment. Traditional environment is completely focusing on application development, followed by this releases will be taken place. But whereas when it comes to the agile environment release planning will be made. Whatever the releases as well as the kind of release goal we want to achieve, that is what generally will be planned first. Based on that, how many sprints will it be taken for us to complete is what generally we do. So that's what I have discussed in the previous session. Now I'm going to discuss about the agile planning process, how usually it happens, because being a scrum master, one must be knowing about the process steps. So once it is done, then I'll get into Jira. So this is what the agile planning process is all about. Archita, you're listening?
Yes, Raj.
Okay, right. So this is what generally the agile planning process is. This agile planning process have these many steps. The first step is called product vision and scope. Usually in agile planning process, whenever the work we need to develop under agile environment, business owner or else a product owner should come up with vision and scope of the product, whatever the product we are developing, for what purpose they are expecting this product to be developed, and what is their vision, what is that they want to achieve finally, what are the possibilities to deliver. This is what generally we call it as product vision and scope. So a product owner or a business team should come up with the product vision and scope, what is that they want to achieve, right? So that is what generally we call it as product vision and scope stands for. So one must be knowing about the vision and scope of the project. So even the stakeholders, whoever are related and relevant, so those stakeholders will be attending in the meeting. So whenever they have attended in the meeting, they discuss about the product description followed by the targeted customers. At the same time, this product falls under which category. So what are the benefits they are expecting out of this? All these will be discussed under the agile planning process. This is what generally the first thing happens in any of the organization. This is what generally the product vision and scope is all about, right? So whatever the product vision and scope a business owner or a product owner wants, that has to be identified here accordingly in the first step. So once the product vision and scope is identified, there is a roadmap has to be created, product roadmap. That's what generally the product roadmap stands for. Usually this is how usually the product roadmap looks like. We can see here. This is what generally the product roadmap is all about. In Jira, because in Jira, product owner has to visualize the roadmap, because unless until they are not visualizing the roadmap, developing will be difficult. So product roadmap has to be created, right? So if you take this online banking software as an example, this is what the roadmap which has to be created by the product owner, because whatever they have discussed in the first level is across the table. They discussed about what is that they want to complete all that. But end of the day, if this going to the agile team to develop, they need to have a clear understanding about what is that they wants to develop. So visibility is required. So you need to visualize the product using Jira, because Jira especially we use for agile project management and bug tracking. So visualization of the project is essentially required. which normally done by the PO, product owner. So product owner translate that vision into a product roadmap. This is what generally happens using Jira. This is the first step we do. Creation of product roadmap is what we do first. Now, whatever the product roadmap was created here, in that product roadmap, there are different epics and user stories we have to write. Because unless until if there are no epics and user stories, then there will be of no value, because epic nothing but large scale of solution. At the same time, user story nothing but short descriptions. We have to write down the epics, user stories, everything by the product owner in this regard here, right? So there are different epics you can see, right? Creation of epic, multiple epics. Well, how many epics do we have? Those many epics will be written. Followed by epics. Subsequently, we need to write down the user stories equally here. That's what generally we do in the second phase. Normally, this is where product owner plays a vital and important role in first and second step. Please do remember, because being a scrum master will not have much role here, because understanding about the vision and scope, creating a vision for a product scope is what generally product owner do, right? So they are the one who has to build all that. At the same time, product owner is the person who has to identify the MVP. Of course, not only by product owner. End of the day, team should also be participating in this. They need to identify a minimum viable product. Based on the visualization of the roadmap, what a PO has decided, end of the day, development team followed by others should identify MVP. This is what we call it as a minimum viable product stands for, right? That's what we do. So this is what generally an MVP is all about. 1 minute, let me show you. Yeah, this is what generally an MVP is. Minimum viable product is what we have to create. Because in this minimum viable product, team will decide. Whoever the team working on the project or a product, they has to understand few things. First of all, what they have understood based on the visibility of the roadmap which was created by a PO, what they have understood. End of the day, what is that they understood is acceptable or not, because practical difficulties and practical implications are different than what is there on the screen, right? So because on screen there are a lot of expectations a PO has, but end of the day, practical viability, practical possibility is needed. That has to be decided. Unless until if you don't know the practical possibility and viability, development of a project won't be possible. So we need to understand what we have understood is important. Point number 1. Followed by what we understood, is it acceptable by the other end or not, right? So whatever we have understood so far, is it acceptable by the people in the other side or not, is what we have to decide. At the same time, viability of understanding, right? So how far it is viable for us to implement? Do we have any possibility to develop viability? Do we have? Because we need to consider the technical complexity in this. Prior to that, we need to see the business value. At the same time, we need to focus more on the duration part, because how much duration do we have? Do we have sufficient timelines to complete this task? Do we have sufficient technical infrastructure followed by the manpower do we have? Do we understand the right essence of the product, right? All these things, these are all something we call it as viability, right? So viability of the implementation and all. So this is what generally MVP is. Like MVP is what we do whenever we are working on the product itself in the beginning. This is where majorly you'd see the difference between traditional to agile. Please do remember, I'm explaining both the things, right? So traditional way, you don't see any MVP, right? So because requirement will be taken and that will be subsequently will be developed accordingly by the team. But whereas when it comes to the agile environment, it is not that way. In agile environment, minimum viable product will be identified first. And whatever they have identified, whatever the MVP they have identified, that has to be implemented subsequently in the next level. This is what we call it as MVP, which is stands for minimum viable product, which will be understood by the team. Usually team has to understand that, because do we have the practical possibility to develop that or not? So that once the MVP, sometimes there are possibilities. MVP can be extended to the next level, or MVP might be failed even, because what we have understood to know that generally MVP has developed. So if the same case, whatever we are expecting is what generally this MVP, what is that we understood, we will be continuing from there onwards. Otherwise, it will stop there, right? So these are the two differences we have to
I have a
understand.
question here, Raj. Can you give me an
Sorry?
example with it? I have a question.
Yes.
So, can you just give me an example for with using the scenario that we are taking, like
Yes,
the
MVP.
banking thing?
You're
Yeah,
talking
the
about MVP, right?
Yes, yes.
Online banking. Let me take online banking as an example. See, in online, I'll take online banking. I'll take an example. For what purpose online banking is? Online banking is an application which will be used for a customers to do online transactions without a requirement, without coming to the home branch, right? That is what online banking will be for. Now, what is in essence here? What is an MVP here? Is it possible to the people, whoever they were located across different places, whoever they were located, is it possible for them to access this application through web browser? Is it possible? Point number one. And that too, is it possible to browse this or access this from any of the devices? Point number two. And do we, are they have any, are they have that viability to use the options which was mentioned on a high level note by an online banking? Right? So these are the major areas. These are the major areas. First of all, we should understand, means the essence of developing an online banking application for what purpose? This is to do some transfer to the people. Maybe majorly online banking will be used by us to transfer money, all that. Majority stake will be for that, right? You know that. Majority stake will be for that. To do some online transfers and all everything, online banking will be used for. At the same time, if you want to download any statements relating to our financial bank statements and all will be taken accordingly, right? So these are the two major benefits through online banking anyone can get. Of course, apart from that, any other payment facilities an online banking is providing by paying some taxes, all that, that is optional anyway, right? So that is anyway that is there. That comes under third category. But the major two categories are what? They should able in a position to access this application from any of the devices, can be accessible from anywhere across places. At the same time, they should make use of all the features which are enabled in online banking, especially maybe money transfer or something like, right? So because that visibility, right? So simplifyness, all these are required, not the grandeur, because it depends on the type of application to application vary. For example, when we are working on e-commerce or travel domain applications, you require some grandiorness, visibility, all that. But whereas online banking doesn't require any grandeur, all that stuff. Because what is that we require is to have to simplicity, right? So even a normal layman who is using online banking should able in a position to identify all the options and to do the banking accordingly, right? So that's what the focus is. But whereas for e-commerce or travel ticketing, so that is required because that sector is entirely different. They require to attract the customers so that that grandiorness is needed. But here it is not required. So the examples what I was mentioned you so far are nothing but MVP, which is called minimum viable product. Understood, Archit? Clear?
Yes. And one more thing. So this happens during the backlog refinement itself.
No. Backlog refinement, it comes later, Archita, right? Backlog
Okay,
refinement, backlog refinement when it comes, whenever you have created all the user stories, all the user stories will be there here. So this
Yes.
is where generally this backlog refinement come into picture. Here backlog, this is backlog.
Okay.
So before you are going for a backlog refinement, first of all, product backlog will be created. Means
So,
whatever the issues or the user stories we have written, first all these things will be there in the backlog. After that, backlog refinement. Okay.
okay, so to create this backlog, I mean, this MVP, so the PO sits with the Scrum team and decides the viability and then accordingly makes the backlog. Is that
Not backlog. What is the minimum viable product?
sorry,
That
user
will be
stories?
decided. Based on that, implementation will be taken care of by the development team. Okay.
Okay.
Understand? Right. Archita, listening?
Yeah. Got it.
I'll repeat again. I think there is some confusion you are feeling. I'll explain that to you again. See, let's say an online shopping portal, for example. Okay, online shopping portal. Some ex-customer has approached and they are asked us to develop an online shopping portal, something like Amazon, Flipkart kind of stuff, an online shopping portal. Online shopping portal have lot of functionalities and features are involved in it. Of course, it takes a lot of time to complete it because lot of features to be updated, all that. But end of the day, if you are in the role of a development team, assume that you and as well as some of your people were involved in it. Before you are completing the full and final product, before you are going to develop the full and final product, what is that you want first? First of all, you need to understand the essence of it. Do you agree on that? First of all, you need to identify the high level note, an essence of for what purpose an online shopping portal is required for a customer is expecting us to develop, for what reason, and how should it looks like, what are the minimum basic criteria or things are needed initially to start with, initially, because you are not completing everything, right? You are not completing everything. What is it required? First of all, minimum user experience and user interface design is needed. And whatever the products they were selling through online, that products has to be classified, categorized, and that products has to be displayed and it is easy for a user to search. That's it. That's it. Nothing more than that. This is what we call it as MVP. Understood now, Archita?
Yes. Thank you.
MVP, right? So that's a basic. See, essence is this. End of the day, essence is what customers has to log into the site and they have to do shopping without any hassleness, all that stuff. That is all the ultimate motive behind. So for that, whatever is required is what will be taken here. That is what generally we call it as MVP, which is called minimum viable product. Understood, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Right. So this is what generally we call it as MVP, minimum viable product. So that is where generally this MVP comes. So when this MVP comes in the second phase itself. Whenever we have created this epics, user stories, translating the requirements, all that. Anyway, whatever the user stories and epics we write, everything will be there in the backlog itself. Automatically that will come. You don't require to create a backlog as separate product backlog. Whatever the issues we have written on the roadmap, automatically those will be appeared on the backlog automatically. How many we have written? All these things you can see in the backlog itself. Here you can see. In the backlog itself, you can see all that, right? So here like this, right? So you can see all the issues here itself. How many issues we have written? And refinement will be done later. When refinement requires to you, whenever you are prioritizing it, then refinement come into picture. Right? So what is that? For example, I will tell you, refinement comes when I'll tell you. For example, there were new user stories were added. You require refinement to be made. Or else in the existing sprint, let us assume that in the existing sprint, out of 5 user stories, team could complete hardly only 4. Team could complete hardly 4. One is balance. That first one user story, either you can transfer to the next sprint or you can mention in the backlog. And again, that refinement process can be done. Understood, Archita? Clear?
Yes, please.
So product backlog refinement will happen over a period of time. It will not happen in the first day itself, because there are 10 user stories as of now. There are 10 user stories as of now where we have maintained as a priority. For example, we have prioritized and as well as stored product backlog items on a prioritization mode. Now the sprint has started, wherein few user stories were completed, few were not completed. What we are doing now, practically speaking, usually it has to complete. If it was not completed, assume that there was one balance. For example, that you have moved into product backlog. What you do now, again, you need to do the refinement, because whatever the priority a product owner expect on the first sprint may not be the priority in the second sprint, because their priority might be changed due to the market conditions, all that. Do you agree on this?
Yes, yes,
Archita, right?
yes.
First point. Second, sometimes during the sprint, first sprint we are working on, let's say customer has added few more requirements to the product backlog, right? That time, for example, there were 3 user stories which are in the high priority. Whenever the other user stories were added, again, what will happen? Those priorities will get affected. Those priorities may not be the high priorities, because the new items came, because these new items might be the priority. So this is also product backlog refinement. So product backlog refinement happens when there are any changes happens in the existing product backlog, refinement will be taken place. And point to be noted, one more thing is that product backlog is not only for user stories. Product backlog is a combination of even epics, even tasks can be included in it, or else technical dates can be included in it. Even whatever we have done so far, for example, if there are any bugs were identified by the team, updating of bugs can also be done in the backlog. Did you understand this? Right.
Can you just repeat that portion? I'm just writing down.
Product backlog means most of the people feel that product backlog is nothing but only user stories. Normally, right? So
Okay.
product backlog is not only user stories. Product backlog consists of user stories. Product backlog consists of tasks, means what are the user stories? If you are simplifying the user story into task and all, that's what we call it as task. For example, user interface, login page creation is a user story. Okay. Assume that we felt there is a lot of complexities involved to create a login page as a user story straight away. To reduce the complexity, what we can do, you can slice the user story into parts. How you can slice that? User interface designing is one part, coding is the second part, testing is the third one, database designing is the fourth part. Yes or no? Right? Archita.
Yes. Am I not audible?
Sorry?
Am I not audible? I said yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So what we are doing in order to reduce that complexity, what is that you are doing? You are slicing that into 4 different parts. User interface designing, database designing as separate, coding as separate, testing as separate. This is how generally 4 tasks were divided. Agree?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Right. We have divided into 4 different tasks. So those tasks can be there in this. Apart from user stories, you can add tasks even. For example, third point. For example, user stories were developed. Finally, there were some bugs were identified by the testing team. And whatever the bugs they have identified, where they have to store that, that will be stored again in the backlog.
Okay.
Understand?
Yes.
That will be stored again in the backlog. Understood? Clear? Understood or not?
Yeah, got it. Got it.
This is where generally backlog. So whenever there are new things are adding, it could be a task, it could be a user story, it could be a bug, refinement process will be taken place, which is a continuous process which normally we have to follow.
Okay.
Understood? Clear?
Yeah.
This is what we call it as backlog stands for. This is where generally backlog refinement process stays. So backlog refinement process is a continuous thing as long as we are working on the backlog items. When something was added or something was modified, if anything were coming and added to the existing repository, every time backlog refinement has to be taken place, and it will happen as well. Agreed? Clear?
Yes. Yes.
So this is coming back to the point. This is what generally we call it as MVP, which is called minimum viable product stands for, right? MVP.
Okay.
So once MVP done, then we go for create release planning process, right? So we create some release planning process. Release planning process, I have explained in the previous session, if you remember, right? So
Yes.
create a release goal, right? So that steps I was explained yesterday, I have explained to you. I hope you understood, right? So release planning process, that's where generally release planning process will be made. After that, the next thing what is that we do is, there are scrum ceremonies come into picture. These are the scrum ceremonies we have. The first scrum ceremony is called sprint planning. Next thing, what is that we do? We do sprint planning. We do sprint planning. What is sprint planning? Assume that there were few user stories are there in the backlog. Now we want to develop this. On what basis this will be developed? This will be developed based on the inputs given by a product owner. Product owner will tell you, this is what the sprint goal I want to achieve in this particular sprint. Okay. That's what generally this sprint planning come into picture. This is how usually sprint planning will looks like, right? So there will be a product owner. There will be a product owner. Product owner will tell you the sprint goal. What is that sprint goal they want to achieve? Is what will be explained by the product owner in the sprint planning. To whom it will be explained? This will be explained to the development team, that ABCDE, right? So these people, it will be explained to the development team. And this development team, whatever the product owner has said, the development team has taken, they have to see the business value and complexity, how much time it will be taken, right? How many hours it will be taken, everything will be decided by them. And how many user stories can be planned in that particular sprint will be decided by the development team itself, not by anyone else. Because there is no one to say that these user stories should be completed. Nothing of that sort. It is completely upon the discretion of the team. Team has to decide how many stories should be taken for the particular sprint, right? For the particular sprint, how many user stories to be taken will be decided by the team itself here. Understood? Clear? Understood or?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Right? Team has to decide. Team has to decide how many user stories will it be taken, and all everything that will be decided by the development team. Now here is a question you could ask me then, Raj, as I could see there is a role called Scrum Master I could see on the screen here. What is that Scrum Master do in sprint planning? If there are any technical difficulties which development team is facing, if they want to know anything relating to the technicalities to understand with, that will be taken care of by the Scrum Master. Okay, first point. First point, what they do? Scrum Masters, being a Scrum Master, what we do is we always support the development team. What they are doing, so whether if there is any technical difficulties if they are facing, that will be organized and managed by the Scrum Master. This is the first task we do. Second task is that we do capacity planning, because there are two things. One is capacity planning, second is velocity. Velocity comes next. Velocity don't come in for sprint planning here, but capacity planning we do. Now, here is my question to you. What is meant by capacity planning? What is your observation about capacity planning? Archita, what is your observation about capacity planning?
So Is it about the how much work can be done and how many man hours it's going to take, and like a planning
Right.
purpose or something?
Right. Excellent. Right. So capacity planning means capacity planning will be the one which majorly explains us about how many hours we have and how many hours these people can spend to complete. To know that, generally capacity planning will be done. Now I am going to explain this on an Excel sheet so that you will be understood well. Okay, on an Excel sheet I will show you how generally this capacity planning will be done. Okay. Right, so capacity planning, how do we do capacity planning? I am explaining now. Okay. Capacity planning will be planned like this as follows. The first thing is that what we do is number of hours a member can spend during a day. If it is disconnected, please connect again. Okay.
Okay, sure.
During a day, like how many man hours will be taken in a day by any person? What is the normal, how many hours it will be taken?
8 hours.
Huh?
8 hours?
8 hours, right? So to be clear, we normally we say 8 hours.
Yes.
But what are the productive hours?
6 hours plus.
Right, 6 to 6.5, right? 6 to 6.5. Why? Because the remaining 1.5 hour will be for breakfast, lunch, and other meetings. At the same time, there are some daily scrum meetings will be conducted as well. So that 6.5 hours is what I am giving. Okay.